Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up. January turned out to be an exceptionally good reading month for me. I finished 14 books, which is just wild considering for like several months last year I didn't read anything. Obviously, I'm not working right now, so I have had a lot of time to just sit down and read or listen to audiobooks while I do chores around the house, which has been fantastic. Although I do think that my reading is probably going to slow down a little bit as the year goes on because I did recently get a job and I will be starting at the beginning of February. We'll see how the rest of the year goes, but I do feel really good having given myself a good head start on my reading challenge and also just getting through some books that have been on my TBR for a while or some really anticipated 2023 releases. I am overall very happy with how my reading went for this month. I do want to give like a quick little shameless plug for my TikTok account over on Book Talk. Every Saturday I am posting a little weekly reading roundup so you can see what I read that week, what I DNF'd, what I am currently reading. If you are interested at all in sort of keeping up with me in real time, then I would recommend checking out my TikTok and following me over there. It would mean a lot to me if you did. But in this video, I'm going to give sort of like mini reviews of the 14 books that I read in January. So if you watched my previous video, you know that for the entire month I was doing a reading experiment where I was reading Shakespeare retellings and reimaginings. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the books that I read for that video because I literally just talked about them in my previous video. So I would recommend checking that out. I liked how the video turned out, so I would really love it if you would go give it a watch. I'll briefly mention that I read 4 of the 5 books that I had set for my TBR for that video. I DNF'd to the 5th one. I am glad that I got through all of the books that I got through because a couple of them were on my 2023 TBR. I also got through some books that have just been sitting unread on my shelves for a while. So the 4 books that I read for that video were A Million Junes by Emily Henry, which I really enjoyed. It ended up being my favorite book of the video. I also read The Gap of Time by Jeanette Winterson, which is a reimagining of The Winter's Tale, and I ended up not really loving this one as much as I wanted to. And then as audiobooks, I listened to Foul is Fair by Hannah Capin, which is a retelling of Macbeth that I also ended up really enjoying. And I listened to the audiobook for That Way Madness Lies, which is a short story anthology edited by Dahlia Adler. This is like 15 YA authors coming together to reimagine all of Shakespeare's plays. I ended up feeling very underwhelmed by this collection in general. I did really enjoy the final story, which was called The Lost Girl. It was a reimagining of The Winter's Tale, and I really loved how that story captured the essence of the play. But overall, not a win for me. You can go watch that video to hear me do more in-depth reviews of each of the books that I finished. All right, so let's talk about the other 10 books that I have not yet talked about on my channel. I started off the year by reading one of the books on my 2023 TBR. It's something that I've liked to do over the past few years is pick one of the books off my yearly TBR and read it as my first read of the year. So this year I decided to start with The Luminaries by Eleanor Catton, which is a huge book, but had been sitting unread on my shelf for far too long, almost 9 years or something. I think I put this on my TBR, like I bought this back in like 2014, 2015, somewhere around in there. This is a historical fiction novel told from several different perspectives over the course of a few weeks in New Zealand during the gold rush. The kind of premise of the story is that at the very beginning, a man comes to a bar where there is a gathering of like 12 other people, and they're all discussing a recent murder, a recent attempted suicide, and a recent disappearance of some other people in their town. Over the course of the story, you sort of get to learn about each of these men and why they have gathered here together. And you're unraveling this mystery, this sort of conspiracy that is surrounding all of the other players in the story. It was so good. It was such a satisfying reading experience because every single chapter was sort of like a puzzle piece or a couple of puzzle pieces. And it was really nice to see the puzzle come together as the book went on. You really do need to read the entire book to see the whole picture, which is sometimes a hard thing for people to want to do, especially when the book is 800 pages. But trust me when I tell you that this is the most worth it 800-page book that I've ever read because it was such a satisfying reading experience. I loved getting to the end and putting that last puzzle piece in and sort of the whole picture coming together. It was so good. There are a lot of really lovable characters in here. There are some characters that you definitely love to hate. And overall, I had a really great time with this book. After I finished The Luminaries, I decided that I wanted to reread A a book in preparation for its sequel, and that is obviously Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. If you don't know, this is a dark academia story following a girl named Galaxy Stern who has been given the opportunity to study at Yale. The only condition is that she has to monitor the secret societies that are active on Yale's campus. And at the beginning of the book, a murder has taken place, and Alex sort of gets wrapped up in the mystery of this murder and starts to figure out that it is definitely tied to the secret societies. Also, her mentor has recently gone missing and she is trying to figure out how she can get him back. I think I liked it more the second time around because I already knew it was coming and I already knew that I loved the characters. So I got really invested in the story and I got to see all of the little clues and hints that Leigh Bardugo had sprinkled throughout. I don't always reread books in series in preparation for new installments, but I did feel it was necessary for this one just because I wanted to give myself a really great refresher for the sequel, and I'm glad that I did that. And then after I finished Ninth House, obviously I did immediately jump into Hellbent. I think I started this the day it came out and I finished it the next day. I listened to the audiobook and it was so good. This picks up a few months after the end of Ninth House, and Alex and a few of her friends are still on a mission to find Darlington. It was a really fantastic installment in the series because we get to learn a little bit more about some of the characters that we already sort of have grown to love in the first book, but we also get to meet some new characters and we get to learn more about some of the side characters that were present in book one. I will say that there were times where I did feel like it sort of fell into a middle book syndrome kind of feel. There were moments where I definitely could see that she was setting up for something that we probably aren't going to get until book 3, but it didn't really lessen my enjoyment of the story. It is like a 500-page book, but I never felt the length. The pacing was really good. I was really invested in all of the characters and all of the action. Overall, I just really, really liked it. And I know that this is a kind of hit or miss series for some people. I definitely understand why many people don't like it, but for me, it is a really fantastic series. I'm really excited to see what she's going to do with book 3, and I really hope we don't have to wait like 4 more years for the final installment in the series. Keeping on with the 2023 releases, the next book that I read was Just the Nicest Couple by Mary Kubica. This is an adult mystery thriller, and it follows these two couples that are friends with each other, and at the beginning of the book, the husband of one of the couples has recently gone missing, and the other couple sort of knows details that they are withholding from the other wife. And over the course of the book, you sort of see the mystery of this guy's disappearance play out, as well as get to know who these characters are and what their motivation is for keeping these secrets. I didn't end up liking this, which was such a huge bummer for me considering that Mary Kubica's previous book, Local Woman Missing, is one of my favorite thrillers that I've ever read. That was easily a 5-star read for me, and this one was bordering on like a 2-star, 3-star read. It was just not good. Literally nothing happens for the first 75% of this book, and I never felt compelled to root for any of the characters because they were all so bland. I didn't get to know any of them the way that I wanted to, and I'd never bought into any of the relationships, any of the friendships. It just was not a good thriller. Then the ending sort of came out of nowhere and it was absolutely ridiculous. I wish that I liked this more. It just did not do what I wanted it to do, unfortunately. Another 2023 release that I read in January, I was really just going through them, was Lost in the Moment and Found by Seanan McGuire. This is the 8th book in the Wayward Children series, which is obviously a series of YA portal fantasy stories that are companions to each other. Each book follows a different character in a different world, and the sort of like tie-in of all of these books is Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. This follows a character that we've met in a previous book, Antoinette, as we sort of learn her backstory and what led her to the world of lost things. We get to see her trying to overcome a lot of hard circumstances, and this was my favorite book in the series, I think. I really loved the first book. It was my favorite in the series for the whole series. And the book sort of had started declining for me in quality and enjoyment until I got to like number 7, number 6, number 7, somewhere around in there. I started kind of seeing the life come back into the series. And this one just completely reinvigorated me to keep going with these books. I loved Antoinette's story. I loved getting to learn about her as a character. She was so strong and independent, and she never compromised who she was as a person, and she stood up for what was right. I really loved her story. It was really sad at times. It was really heartbreaking in moments, but overall, just a really fantastic entry in this series, and I'm so glad that I read it. Next up, I'm going to talk about The Appeal by Janice Hallett, which is a book that I listened to as an audiobook from Lero FM. This is an adult mystery sort of story that is told almost entirely through email exchanges and text exchanges. It centers around a couple of law students who are assisting an attorney in proving or disproving a crime. that has been committed. It focuses on this local theater troupe and the drama surrounding all of the people in this group. I had heard really great things about this, so I went into it with some really high expectations, and it was not a fun book for me to read. I definitely understand why people like it, but for me, I don't like to read books that are set in the real world that I have to suspend my disbelief so far to buy into, and this one was absolutely ridiculous. I don't think that the format did the book any favors because you're only getting to read the emails and the text exchanges, and you're only getting one side of the conversation most of the time. You don't get to see what the response was. So it didn't ever give me a sense of who these characters are or why I should care about any of them. I definitely didn't find it believable that all of these people were just emailing each other, especially when they were literally sitting in the same room instead of like texting, because they also texted in the book. They were text messages. So I know that if I'm sitting in the same room with someone, I'm not going to send them an email to communicate. I'm going to text them. Also, like I said, didn't find any of the characters super likable. I wasn't rooting for any one person or situation in this book because it was just, I never got to know who they were because we're only seeing who they are through these emails. I don't know. I just didn't like it. It was not a fun reading experience for me. Like I said, I definitely understand why people like it because it is sort of this like fun mystery that is absolutely ridiculous. It's just not my typical cup of tea. Like, it's not what I want to read. If I'm going to read a mystery, then I want it to be entertaining, but also believable and actually mysterious. And this one was just crazy. I also read Ghost Music by Anyu, which is a new 2023 release that I got as an advanced listening copy from Libro FM. This is a contemporary sort of magical realism story that's set in China, and it follows a woman who is married to a man and she is ready to have a baby with him. And when she approaches the subject of having a child, he basically puts her off and says that he's not interested in having children. Then his mother comes to stay with them. And so she not only has to contend with her mother-in-law now living in their house, but she's also dealing with the fact that her husband does not want to start a family with her, and she's basically given up her entire life, her entire identity to be married to this man, and so she's struggling a little bit. And then these mysterious packages of mushrooms start showing up at her door, and she and her mother-in-law start bonding over cooking these mushrooms, and it goes in some very interesting places. The book is really just about identity and coming to understand that you don't need to compromise yourself, your well-being, your happiness for someone else. It's sort of about compromise or not compromising what you want and what you believe in. And it's weird. It's different. It's about these mushrooms that eventually start talking to her. It was a much different reading experience than I anticipated. I've never read anything by this author before, so I went into it not really having a lot of expectations. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I loved the writing style. I think that I will go back and read this author's previous book. She has a really magical way of telling a story, and I would highly recommend the audiobook. The narrator did such a great job of bringing this character's voice to life, and I really enjoyed the reading experience. Even if I didn't always understand what was going on, I definitely came out of it loving what I read. So I'm glad that I got around to it this month. Next up, I'm going to talk about Recitatif by Toni Morrison, which is a short story that Toni Morrison wrote back in the 80s. This is sort of like a republished version with an introduction by Zadie Smith. I listened to this one as an audiobook as well, and again, really enjoyed it. The premise of this story is that there's two girls that spend some time in a children's home together when they're 8 years old, and they sort of come in and out of each other's lives as they grow older. The catch of the story is that one of the girls is white and one of the girls is black, but you don't ever know who is who. So as a reader, you're sort of defining race and putting your own bias on these girls' experiences. And the whole premise, the whole point of this story is to encourage the reader to set aside racial bias and see things from all perspectives. And I thought it was a really smart short story, and I thought that the introduction that was written and narrated by Zadie Smith added a lot of context to the story that I don't know that we would have gotten had that not been there. Overall, a really solid story that I think that everybody should pick up. I really think it should be required reading for young kids, like junior high, middle school age kids, because I think that it is a good lesson to learn so early that you have to understand the world from all different perspectives and all different experiences, and you can't place your own personal bias on how the world is shaped. So I really liked it, and I would definitely recommend it if you haven't checked it out. I have a goal for 2023 to read one nonfiction book every single month, and so for January, I decided to read How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith. This is a look at the history of slavery in the United States and how slavery sort of formed this country and how this country was built on the foundations of slavery. And yet so many people don't understand how important of a role slavery played in forming the country, and how there's still lots of people out there that are misinformed, undereducated, and disbelieving of the true nature of this country's origins. The structure of the story is that the author spent some time traveling to different landmarks and famous places within the United States where slavery played a very significant role in the history of that location, and he explores those locations in the greater context of the United States. I thought this was absolutely excellent. One, it is a super accessible nonfiction book. If you're looking to get into nonfiction, this is so good because it is very conversational. It kind of feels like you're just sitting in a room with Clint Smith and he's talking to you about all of these things that he's learned and conclusions that he's come to over the course of his studies. And also, this book was so educational. I learned so much while I was reading this book. I think it's so important to continuously educate ourselves on experiences that are different from our own. And I think it's also very easy to forget that a lot of this stuff is a lot of people's reality. There's so much privilege in not having had to experience that, and also being so far removed from it that you don't even have to think about it. So having this book sort of shove it in your face and say, you have to think about this. You have to sort of come to terms with all of the realities of the United States and the role that slavery played in its forming was just an excellent, excellent reading experience. Another book that I definitely think is required reading for everybody. The final 2023 release that I read in January was unfortunately one of the biggest disappointments of my reading for a very long time. And that was Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is Emily Henry's newest release that is coming out in April this year. I was very lucky to get an ARC of this from NetGalley, and I decided to read it because I was in the mood for some adult contemporary romance, and it so did not live up to my expectations at all. This follows a woman named Harriet who has a really solid group of friends from college that she goes on a trip with every single summer, and at the start of this book, she is arriving for the yearly summer trip. She's a little bit nervous because she and her fiance, who is also part of this friend group, have recently split up and they haven't told any of their friends yet. But when she gets to the cabin, she finds that they have also invited him and he did not turn them down. So he has shown up and they have to pretend to still be together for the entire week so as not to ruin the friend trip. If you're already a lover of Emily Henry and you're looking for something that is going to give you that signature Emily Henry feeling, then this book will do that for you. It definitely has a very signature Emily Henry writing style. You get a couple that you want to root for. You have a really great friend group and a setting that almost feels like a character in itself. It definitely comes to life and brings the story to life. But unfortunately for me, the miscommunication and a lack of communication in this book was so overpowering. It was so rampant throughout the entire story, and not just between the two love interests, the main couple, also the main character and her entire friend group. The friend group in general just had a huge lack of communication. I felt like a lot of the problems and issues that this book had could have been solved with one sit-down adult conversation. It was very frustrating to read at times because I just was like, why don't you talk to each other? I don't think it's the worst by any means. I've definitely read worse books, but it just did not live up to my expectations of Emily Henry. So yeah, it was like a 3-star read for me, which I never thought I would give an Emily Henry book. It is probably my least favorite of all of the books of hers that I've read, especially her adult contemporary romances. I know that the people that are going to be interested in reading this are going to read it regardless of my negative review, but I will just say that go into it with some tempered expectations because it definitely did not live up to book lovers. It didn't live up to people we meet on vacation by any means. I think I probably even enjoyed Beach Read more than I enjoyed this one. So yeah, unfortunately just not a great time. All right, so those are all the books that I read in the month of January. It ended up being a pretty good reading month for the most part. I definitely didn't have any new favorite reads other than probably How the Word is Passed, but I definitely enjoyed most of what I read. And even the stuff that I didn't love, I also didn't really hate, which is great. I'm satisfied that I got off to such a good reading start, and I'm hopeful that I can kind of continue this really great momentum into the rest of the year. Just, I want to read some more like 5-star books because I didn't have a lot of those this month. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought about them. Do you have similar or different opinions to me? I'd really love to know. Also, let me know some books that you read in January, or maybe your favorite and least favorite book that you read in January. I'd really love to know that as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!